We say things like, maybe later, perhaps another time, or I'll see you tomorrow. But for some of us, there won't be a tomorrow. Listen as your worst nightmares come to life. These nightmares have become someone's reality. My name is Justin Crowley, and this is The Murder Project. Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 35 of The Murder Project. In this episode, we are going to be speaking about a case that is kind of disturbing, as most of them are. This is a case about murder and mystery, and also a little bit of misconduct, which we have seen in several of these episodes, so we're going to keep that rolling. This is an episode about Jerry Michael Williams and what exactly happened to Mike as he went by. It is a wild story because in the beginning, he looks like a missing person, but there's a little bit of twists and turns that go along with the story. It's going to be a good one. The debrief is going to be really good as well on this because there is a lot of information that ties in with this as far as motives and other things that go on. It's pretty interesting. I hope you guys will stick around and listen to part 2 of the debrief. We love bringing those to you. So without further ado, strap in, ladies and gentlemen. Episode 35 starts right now. Jerry Michael Williams, who also went by Mike, was born on October 16th, 1969. Where we're going to pick up on this story is actually going to be before the incident that we're going to be talking about. The incident date is December 16th of 2000. So, in talking a little bit about Mike and giving some of his backstory, Mike was from Florida, and he grew up around the Tallahassee area, and he met in high school, his freshman year in high school, he met a guy by the name of Brian Winchester. Brian and Mike were really good friends when they were in high school. Brian and Mike also were friends during college and then after college. One of the other people that Mike and Brian were friends with was a woman by the name of Denise. And in high school, Denise actually started dating Mike, and Brian started dating a woman named Kathy, also in high school. And these four people, basically these two couples, they stayed friends from high school into college and into their adult lives. They got married around the same time. They had a child around the same time. They lived in the same area. Mike was a successful appraiser of real estate. He even secured a job before he even graduated from college in this field. His friend Brian was a insurance salesman, and Mike's wife Denise worked in accounting. So they had a lot going for them, both couples. They were all working hard. They were all trying to make their way in the business that they were coming up and working in. And it is even said that Mike was a workaholic of sorts. He would put in as many hours as it would take to get the job done. So if Mike had to work 12-hour days, 15-hour days, 18-hour days, he would do it. And he was rising through the ranks at his company because he was so dedicated to the work that he did. But as we know, a lot of times what happens is if you put a lot of effort in one place, other areas start suffering. So we have the two couples that are friends since high school. There's some issues that are starting to go on between Mike and Denise because Mike is working a lot, and it seems like the household, they've got a 18-month-old daughter, and it seems like some things are kind of starting to break apart in that household. Now, one of the good things is that Mike has Brian to lean on. He can confide in him the things that are going on in his marriage, and also Brian is a good friend of Denise's, and Brian's wife, Kathy, is also friends with Denise. So they kind of have this support structure that's going on, and they can kind of bounce off each other and confide in each other and try to work things out as a group. And Mike is also trying to work things out with his wife because they're coming up on their 6th wedding anniversary. And he's really trying to ignite the flame again because he and Denise had been going through a rough patch the last couple of years. They hadn't been really talking a whole lot. Their sex life was pretty much in the toilet, and that was something that was bothering Mike to a point that he had told Brian a lot about it, saying that, that they had not had any sort of relations together since Denise was pregnant with their daughter. And so it had been several years, 18 months to 2 years, since they had had any intimacy with one another, and it was something that was starting to bother him. But their 6th wedding anniversary was coming up, and Mike had planned to get away with Denise so that they could go by themselves to a resort-type area. I'm sure it's all in this kind of Gulf Shores location, and just kind of get away and leave it all behind them and try to rekindle this relationship that they had, because Mike could tell that it was kind of falling off the rails, and he was doing his best to make sure that that relationship worked out because he loved his wife and he loved his daughter, and he wanted to make sure that that family unit stayed together. But it seemed like that Denise was kind of on the other side of that. Like, she didn't really want to put in the effort to help out in the relationship. It was also stated that she had kind of started slipping on her household duties, things that she was supposed to do at the house while Mike was working and taking care of the daughter. And it was said that Mike had to kind of do double duty, and it was putting a lot of strain on the relationship. You can look at this one of two different ways, in my opinion. You can look at it that Denise had totally checked out of the relationship and she wasn't looking at trying to save that relationship, or you could look at it as she is dealing with a overwhelming amount of stress, trying to, carry all of the responsibilities of rearing the child, and then also the household duties and everything that goes into that. And she could have been in a spot of, depression, and she had a different way of dealing with her anxiety/depression that somebody else might have. So I think it's you could look at it both ways and say, well, maybe she didn't want to continue this relationship, or maybe she was just feeling overwhelmed. Now, the actual what side of that coin it is, we will find out as we go along, because we always like to get into those details. Before this event is going to take place, where Mike and Denise go out of town and have this kind of special getaway weekend, Mike decides that he wants to go for one final duck hunt before they take off. One thing about Mike is that he is a avid duck hunter, fisherman, hunter in general, and he really likes to go out to Lake Seminole, which is about a 50-minute drive from his residence in Tallahassee, Florida. And he is a skilled hunter, a skilled fisherman, and he knows these areas, so to speak, like the back of his hand. And before he goes on this trip with his wife, he wants to go get one last duck hunt in. The season only goes, I believe, until January. And depending on what his schedule is, maybe he just figured that since he's taking this day off, he might as well go get one in. And so he heads out. From what the reports say, he leaves his house around 4 o'clock in the morning, maybe a little before. He goes to his office building where he keeps his firearms, and he gets his shotgun. His shotgun is in a secured case. And then he jumps in his mid-90s Bronco. I kind of looked him up. It's kind of like the OJ Bronco, for lack of a better comparison. But It's kind of that box-style Bronco. He's got a little fishing boat. It's about the size of a canoe, but it would be like a flat-bottomed boat, and then it would have a space in the back for a small motor. Now, Mike heads out. He goes to Lake Seminole. He puts his boat in the water, and he starts his trip to where he's going in this location to do his duck hunting. Now, as the day progresses, Denise starts to get worried because she knows that Mike is going to be out for several hours duck hunting. Then he is going to load up all of his equipment, his boat. He's going to head back to the house. They are going to drop their daughter off, and then they are leaving to go on this little weekend getaway. The only problem is that Mike never shows up. And as time goes on, Denise starts to get more and more worried because she knows that he's really looking forward to this trip and he wouldn't miss it. And not only that, but he hasn't called her to tell her that there has been an issue, or he got, a flat tire, he had boat trouble, he's stranded somewhere. She has no information as to kind of what's going on. So she starts calling around and letting people know that Mike hasn't shown up. And it is later on in the day when they can kind of get some family together to start looking for Mike. Mike's family is going to go out and look for him. His dad at this point has already passed away, but his mom is helping kind of organize some people. Denise has got a hold of some of her family and friends. Brian has been contacted, and Brian and his father go out and start looking for Mike. And the thing about Brian is that being his best friend, Brian knows exactly where Mike likes to hunt. He knows the areas that he normally visits, and he could be a huge asset to this investigation. And it turns out that he actually was, because when Brian and his dad show up out to Lake Seminole, they find Mike's Bronco and the trailer for his boat sitting in an area that he has been known to hunt at. And basically what he would do in this situation, referring back to Mike, is he would show up, he would launch his boat, and then they would drive out. He would take the boat out to a certain area where they normally go duck hunting. Or if it's public land, they may have public blinds set up so that you could sit in a blind and put your decoys out and be able to hunt that way. But Brian and his dad show up. They find the Bronco. They find the trailer. But there's no boat and there's no Mike. So they launch their own boat, and as other people have done, and they start searching for Mike to see if they can find him. Now, unfortunately, at this time, there is a large storm coming in, and so their time is limited. And Brian said that while he and his father were out looking for him, they had thought about giving up because they were afraid that they were going to be kind of trapped in this storm. And it is December, so it is cold outside, even in Florida. And with the rain, it's only going to make things worse. And in a situation like this, even when you're trying to search for someone, you don't want to end up being a victim of something else or getting stranded somewhere, so that search efforts have to be diverted away from the intended person, and now those resources have to be put on you. So Brian's kind of thinking they need to head back, and he was saying that his father was very adamant about searching a little bit longer. And Brian even made reference that his father looked at Mike as kind of like a son, because Mike's father had passed away, and Mike spent a lot of time with Brian growing up, spent a lot of time at their household, and so Brian's father had a close relationship with Mike, and he was really wanting to find Mike, as well as Brian and everybody else out there that was searching for him. Just before they decide to call it off, Brian says, "Let's go look in this one other area that I think he might be." So they kind of troll down the area that they want to go look at, and they find Mike's boat. And when they find Mike's boat, they look over into it. They see that the boat is sitting vacant. There's no one in it. There's a couple of life jackets, Mike's shotgun is still in the case, sitting in the boat. The key is in the off position. The motor is not running, but Mike is not in the boat. So they end up going back and alerting the authorities about where they found the boat at. But unfortunately, at this time, when authorities figure out where the boat is at, the storm comes in, so they have to push off further rescue efforts until the storm passes. And from the information I read about this case, it looks like early the next morning, they were able to resume rescue efforts in finding Mike. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Department had gone out and located Mike's boat. They went ahead and brought it over to a dock area and pulled the boat from the water. And when they looked into the boat and started examining it for evidence, they did not come up with much, if anything at all. There was no signs of a struggle inside the boat. There was no signs of damage to the boat, which in that area, from what I read, it stated that there were a lot of stumps, logs, and kind of undergrowth in the actual lake area where they would typically hunt at. So it wasn't uncommon for people to be kind of going through there on their boat, hit a stump or a log, and then be ejected from the boat or fall overboard or puncture a hole into the boat and actually capsize it. So there had been multiple people that had drowned in this lake, and because of reasons just like I mentioned. And when the initial investigation kind of started, the police and the Florida Fish and Wildlife officials kind of were looking into what were the possibilities, and based off the things that I was speaking about, it seemed like the only possibility that could have come about is that Mike might have fallen overboard. Now, as I mentioned, there was not any damage to Mike's boat. There was not any evidence suggesting that he hit something or was thrown overboard. But at this point in time, the only thing that they could come up with was that Mike had fallen out of the boat and subsequently drowned in the water because he was by himself. And after this, the officials notify Denise that they had found Mike's boat and that they had not found Mike himself. Everybody at this point in time is going off of the theory that Mike fell into the water and that sooner or later they would be able to find Mike's body. Now, one of the things that I mentioned previously is that several people had drowned in this area, and in about the last 100 years from this incident, around 80 people had drowned, and so far they had been able to recover all of those persons that drowned in this same lake. So they had a 100% recovery rate of persons who drowned in this area. So they were pretty confident that Mike's body would turn up if in fact he did drown. And there was no other evidence at this point in time to suggest anything different. Now, as the days kind of went on and the weeks kind of went on, Mike's body never turned up. And at this point, people are starting to wonder if there was a chance that Mike just ran away. But Denise and Brian and the family and everybody was kind of in there talking, saying there's no way that this would actually happen. There's no way that Mike would leave. He loved his wife. He loved his daughter. He loved his job. He loved his life. He loved everything about it. And that there's no possible chance that anything like that would ever happen. It had to be an accident that Mike went out to go duck hunt. He fell out of the boat and he drowned. And it would just be a matter of time before the body was found. There's no reason to think otherwise. Mike would never leave. Now, one of the things that kind of came up in the beginning is that Mike's mother felt a little bit concerned about what happened to him. And she was kind of going off of this theory that there's no way, because of Mike's experience as a hunter and a fisherman, that he could have just drowned in the water. Now, I know that sometimes freak things happen, accidents happen, but she felt confident that whatever Mike got into, whatever situation that he got into, he would be able to get himself out of it. One of the things that his mother was worried about, Mike's mother was worried about, was him being eaten by alligators while he was out hunting. And he had assured his mother that alligators did not feed during that time of the year, and she didn't have to worry about him being attacked and eaten by an alligator because it wasn't their time to feed. No worries there. He was an experienced hunter-fisherman. He was good to go. But he ended up falling victim to either an accident or something else. And what could that something else be? The only other alternative is if Mike didn't drown and Mike didn't run away, then someone did something to Mike. The only thing is, there's no evidence to prove that something happened to Mike. Now, after a short amount of time, it is said that Denise held a small type vigil for Mike, and it was off-putting to Mike's mother, Cheryl, that Denise would have this kind of vigil for him and this remembrance for him because she thought that there was still a chance that Mike was out there somewhere. She was kind of saying like, hey, no one's even found Mike, so why are we holding this service for him, acting like that he's dead? And that was a little off-putting for Cheryl, but everybody kind of went along with it. And Cheryl most definitely went along with it because at this point in time, she still had visitation rights to her granddaughter, and she did not want to mess any of that up. And in any of these cases, nothing, well, in this particular case, nothing develops very fast. And so the leads dry up, there's no further evidence, and everybody just kind of moves on. And in one of the search efforts, about 6 months later, they find a hat in the water. And it's kind of in the water, but up against like a bank. And they find a hat, and they're looking at it, and they're thinking to themselves, is there a chance that this is Mike's hat? Because at this time, we have to realize that law enforcement has already searched this entire area multiple times. They've gone in with the kind of PVC pipe pole, and they've kind of bounced it off the bottom of the lake area to try to find Mike, to see, if he did drown, could they find a body? They had dive teams out there. They had people trolling up and down in boats looking for any evidence, and they found nothing. But all of a sudden, one day, they find a hat. And after they find this hat, they think to themselves, is there a chance that this could be Mike's? So they end up calling Brian. If I have my information correct, they call Brian and ask him if this is a hat that Mike had. And Brian said that it was a very distinctive hat, and because of the color of the bill of the hat, and that Mike actually had a hat just like that. And in order for him to kind of seal this piece of evidence up, he was able to produce a picture of him and Mike, where Mike is wearing a hat that looks identical to the one that they found. So after they find this hat, they start searching the area that the hat was found in. And in the water, they find a jacket and some waders. And what waders are, if you're not familiar with that, is they're commonly used in hunting, duck hunting, and then also some sort of fishing. If you have to get, say, waist deep in the water, they're solid rubber. They have rubber boots that connect in. You kind of jump into these waders, pull them over your arms like kind of like bib overalls, and it protects you from getting wet. Now, since they're water, you have to be aware that if water gets inside of them, it can pose a drowning hazard. So when they find the waders and the jacket, they search the jacket. Inside the jacket, there is a flashlight that, for some reason, still works. And they also find a hunting license that has Mike's name on it. And when they find the hunting license, they're still able to read the name on the hunting license. The waders and the jacket don't seem like they have just a whole lot of damage to them. and the flashlight still worked. So investigators started thinking to themselves, is there a possibility that this evidence was planted here, or is it just by luck because of the jacket probably being waterproof and the waders being rubber that there was not a whole lot of damage to these items, and once they sunk to the bottom of this area, it kind of just preserved itself in the mud. And at this point in time, they don't have any other information to go off of, because waders and a jacket and a hat, for that matter, are not a smoking gun to any sort of incident. It just means that they found a jacket that belonged to Mike, they found waders that belonged to Mike, and they found his hat. And at this time, the working theory is that Mike did actually drown, and that he was probably snatched up by an alligator and put into a alligator type den, which would have been under the water, and his body was stored there for them to eat later, or they already snacked on it and all of his remains were gone. Which several people would later point out that would be highly unlikely, that no parts of his body were found, but they didn't have anything else to go off of. So the working theory at this point was that Mike did drown and that he was probably eaten by alligators. Now, when all of this happened, Denise was able to get a death certificate for Mike, because at this point in time, Mike was listed as a missing persons. So she wasn't able to get a death certificate for Mike. And what would she need this death certificate for? Well, it turns out Mike's got a couple of insurance policies that go anywhere, I've read, from $1.5 to $1.75 million. So just, let's say, around $2 million. And when this death certificate is issued, Denise is able to cash in on that insurance. Now, I also need to let everyone know that the insurance companies that had to pay out these policies did their own internal investigation to see if they can figure out a way, in my opinion, basically not to have to pay the money out. But after they did their investigation, they were not able to determine that anything was different from what the local law enforcement had stated, and that the death certificate was legitimate, and for that reason, they had to go and pay the money out. So now Denise is sitting on a cool $2 million, and she has basically moved on and stated that she thinks that her husband had drowned, and there's no other evidence to point in any other direction, in her opinion, and so she has to move on with her life with this $2 million. Now, there's nothing that says to me so far that any of this is suspicious in a way that we can point a finger and say, well, she collected insurance money, so she has to be guilty. Or, I don't know if I would have handled it this way. This seems kind of irresponsible in my opinion. Well, we can say that, but at this point in time, the evidence is what the evidence is. So let's fast forward a few years. And Brian and his wife, Kathy, they have split up. And they are no longer married. And whatever happened between them happened, and Brian and his wife were divorced. Not long after this, Denise starts dating a new man, and guess who that new man is? It's not Brian. No, I'm just kidding. It is Brian. She starts dating Brian. Denise and Brian are now dating. Now, I know what you're thinking, and I want everybody to hold up for a second. Just because a man dies in a drowning accident, and then the widow starts dating the dude's best friend fresh off of divorce, doesn't mean they did anything wrong. Okay? Let's just let this thing play out. Because everybody else in town is thinking the same thing that you're thinking right now. And the same thing that I was thinking when I first heard about this story. So let's just hold on. Okay? Let's see where this goes. So now, Denise and Brian are dating each other, and Cheryl is not too happy with this. Cheryl's Mike's mother. Cheryl's not too happy about this. And she is getting increasingly paranoid that Mike met some sort of foul play, that something happened to it. She would take out newspaper ads and she would kind of hint at certain things, but she was trying to keep everything civil because, remember, the granddaughter. But over time, Denise and Cheryl's relationship would dissolve, and Cheryl would not actually be able to see her granddaughter anymore. And it's after this that Cheryl kind of starts making some accusations that she believes that Brian and Denise might have something to do with her son's disappearance. But these are all just theories because we don't have any evidence to the contrary. Nobody can say, well, yes, you know what, it probably was them because of ABC, or it was them because of XYZ. We have nothing other than the fact that they started dating each other after Brian was divorced. And although that does look suspicious, it's not anything that we can put our finger on and say, this is what it is. It's not anything that we can say, this is concrete evidence that Brian and Denise did something. So time marches on. And in all of the true crime that I watch, everything that is good in some way, shape, or form turns bad. And what I'm talking about in that is that Denise and Brian date each other. They end up getting married. They're settling down in their life. Things are moving on. Things are definitely moving on for them. Time has kind of stopped for Mike's mom, Cheryl, because she's trying to figure out what happened to her son. But everything kind of goes in the regular flow of life. Except Brian and Denise are now having some troubles in their relationship. And Denise says that Brian is a sex addict and that there was already some kind of cheating going on in the relationship before they were even married. And if you talk to Denise, she says that Brian cheated on her all of the time. If you talk to Brian, he says that Denise was also cheating on him as well. So it looked like their relationship was doomed basically from the beginning. But they stay together for quite some time after they get married. And if I'm not mistaken, they're married longer than Denise and Mike were married when this whole thing starts falling apart. Their relationship, that is. So after Denise and Brian split up, Denise decides that she wants a divorce from Brian. Now, Brian is not on board with this. He wants to hold this marriage together. He has a lot invested in this marriage, and he wants to keep it intact as best that he can. But Denise is not having it. And in August of 2016, Denise, while they're separated, basically has an appraisal done on the couple's home because she is going to divorce Brian and she is going to sell the house that they live in. And Brian finds out about this because he gets a copy of the appraisal. And when he gets a copy of this appraisal, he figures out that Denise is taking some steps in splitting up with him, and that he is going to have to deal with the fact that Denise is no longer wanting to be with him. So Brian decides he's got to take one more shot at it. You know, he's got to do what he's got to do for love. And around the beginning of August, after this appraisal has already been done, Denise goes and gets in her car, and she's about to head to work, and she feels like something is strange about this drive that she is on. Feels like someone is in the car with her. And as she's driving, she calls her sister like she normally does, and lo and behold, bing, bang, bong, someone pops out of the old back of the car. And when they pop out of the back of the car, They start struggling with Denise. They end up producing a handgun, shoving it into Denise's ribs. And when she turns around, guess who it is? Anybody want to guess who it is? If you're saying Brian right now, you're right. Brian is now in the back of the car. He's got Denise with him at gunpoint, and he is trying to tell her to drive to specific locations. Now, while Denise is driving, she does not go to any of the places that Brian tells her to go. She says that she is kind of in a daze. She's not listening to what's going on. Brian already snatched the cell phone from her, so she does not have contact with her sister anymore, but her sister did realize that something bad was happening. She just didn't know what. About an hour goes by where Denise is basically held hostage. She's been kidnapped by Brian, and Brian is telling her some things about their relationship and that he wants to keep it together. He also says that he is suicidal and that he had been planning on killing himself with the gun that he is holding against Denise's ribs. And so she's a little bit freaked out, but she is able to tell Brian that if he can get his life together, that if he can just get his relationship back with Jesus and get right, she would take him back. And it is telling Brian these things that makes him back off, and he lets Denise go. And he says, okay, you know what? I'm going to get myself right. We're going to get back together. After Denise is released from Brian's hostage situation, she calls her sister back and tells her sister what happened. Well, her sister just happens to be married to a police officer. So her sister says, you got to go to the cops. You got to tell them what happened. Denise is like, no, this is sort of a big deal, but I'm just going to let it slide. And basically what happens is Denise's sister tells her husband calls Denise and says, listen, you have to go to the police. You have to tell them what happened. We can get a restraining order against Brian. We can make sure that he can't have any contact with you and your daughter. And we can make sure that Brian gets put in prison for a very long time. So, reluctantly, Denise goes to the police and she tells them what happened. And while they are having this conversation, and you can find this interview online, there's several different YouTube videos that have the full interview from Denise when she spoke to police. But she tells them what happened. She says that she is afraid for her life. She says that she hopes Brian goes to prison. All of the kind of things you would expect a victim of this certain crime to say. But one of the weird things I found that in this investigation, in this interview into Brian and his kidnapping, they start talking about Mike, just kind of right in the middle of it. And the way that the detective kind of rolls into this is that he asked Denise, where do you think that Brian was going to take you? Do you think he was going to take you somewhere and kill you? And she's like, I kind of feel like it. And he's like, do you think he was going to take you where Mike's body is? And she's kind of like, I don't know. I wouldn't know what you're talking about. And he's like, and the detective's like, come on, you gotta believe that something bad happened to Mike. Do you really believe that he drowned out in Lake Seminole? And she's like, yeah, I truly believe that. I've thought that this whole time. There's nothing to the contrary that makes me think that something else happened. And so the detective kind of presses her like, hey, let's talk about this. And then she's kind of like, hey, do we really have to discuss this now? I've had a heck of a day. Like, emotions are running high here, and I don't really want to talk about this. And so the detective's like, but you do understand that you are in a very dangerous situation today, and you narrowly escaped that situation. You know, you could be dead right now. And she's like, yes, I was talking to my brother-in-law. He kind of reiterated that this was a situation that could have turned really bad, and so I've got a lot on my mind right now, but I really want to get to the courthouse, and I really want to get that restraining order against Brian. The police assure her that she's going to have plenty of time to do that. They kind of ask some more questions about Mike. She doesn't really want to talk about it, And so they kind of let that go. And when they let that go in that interview, they don't really have an opportunity to bring it back up with Denise. She gets the protective order against Brian, and now Brian is arrested for the kidnapping and also several other crimes that are included kind of in that kidnapping charge, breaking into her vehicle, taking her hostage, all of those things. And he is put in jail. Now, when Denise goes and testifies against Brian, she tells the judge that everything that happened, and also that she believes that Brian should get life in prison, because if he doesn't, she is going to be living in fear that once he gets out of jail, he will come and finish the job, i.e. kill her daughter, whatever the scenario might be. So after the trial is over, Denise is stunned to find out that Brian gets 20 years in prison for his role in this kidnapping. And a lot of people as Denise as well as her family can't believe that out of all this, Brian got 20 years. How could that be? He could have got life in prison. So things continue to roll on. Brian goes to prison and life goes back to normal for a little bit. Now, if you remember me saying in August of 2016 is when this event happened. In 2017 is when Brian goes to trial. Late 2017, around October, is Brian's trial. Fast forward to May 8th, 2018, and what should ever happen? Denise is arrested as she leaves Florida State, where she works, for the murder of Mike Williams. So what happened in all of this? What was the situation that went down that caused Denise to get arrested? Well, what happened is that when good old Brian got arrested and the cops started talking to him, they cut a deal. And they said, hey, listen, we know what's going on. We know that you had something to do with it. They have zero evidence to say that Brian and Denise did anything to Mike. But they tell Brian, if you tell us what happened to Mike, we will give you complete immunity against any charges that you could face in the disappearance of Mike. And he's got to be thinking to himself, if this is actually all true, he could get a lot more time than what he was going to get. A life sentence on the kidnapping. He could get a life sentence for the murder of Mike, or he could get the death penalty because Florida still has the death penalty. So at this point in time, Brian's thinking it's time to save the bacon. And by that, I mean himself. So he tells police everything. And I'm going to give you the abridged version of what happened because I really want to cover the main details of this in the debrief. But what goes down is that on the day that Mike goes hunting, he's not by himself. He's got a friend with him. And that friend is Brian. And when they set out to go hunting, they hop in Mike's boat. They get out on the water. Brian tells Mike, hey, let's go ahead and get our waders and our jacket on. We're running short of time. When we get to the area, I got this special spot. When we get there, we just need to jump out and get to hunting. So Mike, Brian, don their waders, their jackets. They get their guns in the boat. They get everything there. They're ready to rock and roll. They head out. After they head out, Brian tells Mike that the motor stalled on the boat or something happened, and he gets Mike to stand up. Now, if you remember me telling you guys, this is a small boat. So once Mike stands up and starts trying to investigate what's going on, Brian pushes him into the water. Now, Brian's thought is that when he enters the water, Mike is going to immediately sink because he's wearing the waders. And when Mike goes into the water, this doesn't immediately happen and Brian starts to panic. He pulls the boat away from Mike a little bit so that Mike can't grab onto the boat, and he's basically watching his best friend for his entire life, struggle to stay above water. But when Mike doesn't drown, Brian starts thinking to himself that he's got a whole nother situation that he has to deal with. Because Mike's mom was right. He was a skilled hunter and fisherman. What Brian didn't realize is that when Mike went into the water and he was struggling, he wasn't struggling because he was trying to stay above water per se. He was struggling because when he went into the water, he immediately got out of his jacket and got out of his waders. And the whole plan that Brian was counting on, that Mike would drown immediately, evaporates within an instant because Mike is smart. Mike got out of his jacket and his waders. Now, Mike positioned himself. Remember all of the stumps and logs and stuff that I said were in the water? Mike positioned himself over one of those stumps so that he could stay above water. And he's freaking out and trying to get Brian's attention to be like, hey, good old buddy, why are you not coming back to save me? And Brian's thinking to himself, I got to take this to the next level because we're in a crap storm now. I mean, what is he going to say? You accidentally fell in the water. Why didn't you help me out? Now you're in the boat, but you drove the boat away from me, and you're basically wanting me to drown. Why would you do that? So Brian's got to think on the fly. What's he going to do? He's got to end the situation. So Mike has to watch his best friend take his shotgun out of the case, load it, and then troll back over to where Mike is. As Brian's trolling across where Mike is, he leans the gun over the side of the boat and he shoots him in the face, and he kills Mike instantly. After he turns the boat around, he puts his gun back in the boat. He goes back by. He grabs Mike's body because he can't let Mike drown into the water now because his face is missing, and he pulls Mike into the boat. He takes the boat. He goes over to another docking area that's closer to where they're at this point. He docks the boat. He runs back to the truck because at this point they're not too far away from where they launched the boat at. He runs back to his truck, which we'll later find out is not a truck. They refer to it as a truck the whole time, but it's actually a Suburban. He runs back to his truck. He drives back over to the loading area. He backs it down the ramp, and he pulls Mike's body out of the boat and into the Suburban. Now, originally I was thinking to myself that there would be blood in the boat, there would be evidence, but then you also have to consider the fact that there was that rainstorm. And I'm not going to say that there wasn't a lot missed on law enforcement's part in this, but we'll get to that in the debrief. But after Brian loads Mike into his Suburban, he drives back to town because Brian's got an alibi in check, like in play. He's supposed to go hunting with his dad that same morning. He set the hunting trip up with Mike really, really early, and then he set his hunting trip up with his father a little later in the morning so that it would make it look like he just rolled out of bed and went hunting with his father, and, well, it can't be me because I was out hunting. But this whole incident, now that he had to shoot Mike, is taking way too long, and he's blown his timeline. His timeline is busted. So he gets in his Suburban with Mike in the back. He drives back to his house. When he gets to his house, he crawls back in bed, not to wake his wife up, and then he calls his father and says, hey, buddy, I accidentally overslept. And the reason he had to do this is because if he used his cell phone on the way back into town, it would have pinged at a tower, and the police would be able to look at that later and show that Brian wasn't at home. But he doesn't make any phone calls. He waits till he gets home. He'd taken his wife out the night before. Brian had taken his wife out the night before and got her pretty intoxicated. So she's snoozing in. She's taking the old late snooze, sleep off the hangover. So Brian's able to get back in bed, call his dad, let him know that he's late. He's not going to make the hunting trip. As this is going on, his wife kind of casually just kind of wakes up and is like, hey, what's going on? He's like, hey, I overslept, but I'm going to go take the dogs and do a little training because he would train hunting dogs. And she's like, okay, well, see ya. So he leaves the house, jumps in his Suburban because now he's got to get rid of the body. and he drives to a Walmart, and he goes in to get him some supplies. Does anybody want to know or take a guess at what this supplies is? Brian buys a shovel, a tarp, and some weights. Like, basically walking up to the cash register like, hey, good morning, how are you? I'm good, how are you? Oh, just getting me a murder kit. And they're like, yeah, it looks like. They say, what do you got there? Shovel, tarp, wait, do you need any duct tape or anything? No, he's already dead. All right, well, looks like you're good to go. Have a nice day. Here's your receipt. Make sure you show it at the door. And Brian leaves. He actually runs into another one of his friends while he's at the store, and his friend notices that Brian's acting a little weird, but later on when he finds out that Mike went missing, he just assumes that the reason that he is acting weird is because he is in a hurry to go search for his friend, which is not true, because his friend's dead in a Suburban out in the parking lot. And I also forgot to mention, whenever Brian went out to his Suburban, when he got ready to leave his house, his driveway was sloped, so his Suburban was sitting at an angle. And when he walked out into his driveway, there was blood dripping out of the back of his Suburban into the driveway. And so somehow he was able to hose that off without anybody noticing and continue on his way. Now, after Brian leaves the Walmart, he goes to a different lake area, and he drags Mike out. He digs a grave, and he puts him in it. And after he puts him in it, he leaves, and no one ever goes back out there until 2017, 2018, when Brian leads police to his body. In the confession that Brian gave, it is chilling, because you get to hear a man that not only is going to prison for kidnapping his wife, who used to be married to his best friend, who he killed, but you can hear, in my opinion, the anguish and sorrow and resentment and all of these things in his voice. When he's talking about Mike, he cries a lot. When he talks about the relationship that Mike has with his father, he cries a lot. Because it's only at this time that I believe he realizes the severity of what he did to his best friend so that he could be with his wife. And at this point, ladies and gentlemen, for Brian, it's too late. He's already done the things that he's done. And that's why I honestly believe that he kidnapped Denise, because he has a whole lot invested into this relationship. He killed his friend, his best friend, since childhood, to be with a woman who no longer wants to be with him anymore. And the severity of that crushes him mentally, and he breaks. And when he breaks, he kidnaps Denise, and this whole thing unfolds, and now we have what we have taking place. And the details of what happens in this whole situation, it's a lot darker than what I'm getting into right now, because I want to be able to go through those details with Mike in the debrief and break them down and really talk about this, because it's a wild ride, guys. It's more sad than anything. When I look at the totality of this situation, of all the lives lost in any murder situation, you're going to have people whose lives are broken. But in this one, listening to the interviews and everything that took place, it was kind of one of those things where I was like, wow, this is terrible. And Denise ends up getting convicted of her part in the murder, and she is sentenced to life in prison. However, in January of 2020, she appeals that conviction and stated that there was no evidence that she was involved in the actual commission of the murder. And in November of 2020, the murder conviction was overturned, but her conspiracy to commit murder was upheld, and she still had a 30-year sentence that she had to complete on that. So she did not actually get out of jail. So her murder conviction was overturned, but the conspiracy was upheld. So she actually ended up getting 10 more years than Brian did on this whole thing, and which I have a few things I want to say about that as well. But you guys know what time it is. It's time for me to go, and we will schedule the debrief. Hopefully I can get Mike in here within the next day or so, and we can hash this thing out and bring it to you guys. I'm looking forward to talking about this case even further, because I saved all of the juicy details for the debrief. Thank you guys so much for listening. I appreciate it so much. I will talk to you next time. Goodbye. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening to this episode of The Murder Project. Our numbers are going up, our downloads are going up, and we have you guys to thank for that. If you're looking for us on social media, you can find us on Facebook. We're at The Murder Project. If you need to search for us, type in facebook.com/podcasttmp. If you're looking for us on the old Instagrams, we are at The Murder Project. And if you're looking for us on Twitter, we are at The Murder Pod. Also, don't forget, go over to whatever platform you're listening on, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button if they haven't. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, hit that subscribe button, leave us a review, and jam out that 5 stars. Give us that 5 stars. That really helps us a lot, and we do appreciate that. If you need to get a hold of us for any long-form questions or comments, we do have an email address. That email address is contact@themurderproject.com. And as always, Mike or myself will get back to you guys. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening to this episode of The Murder Project. I look forward to speaking to everyone soon. But before I go, please remember, head up, eyes up, and stay alive.